Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're just admitting everybody to the webinar, and the event will get underway in just a moment. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're just admitting everybody to the webinar, and the event will get underway in just a moment. Oh, and Martha, if I could just trouble you to mute your audio. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We're broadcasting tonight from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We couldn't be more delighted to have all of you joining us here tonight, both here in the webinar and live on YouTube now and in the future. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us for what will be an excellent event. We are here, of course, tonight to celebrate the new publication, Stories I Might Regret Telling You, a memoir by the inimitable Martha Wainwright. I'd like to give special thanks to Random House Canada for helping to pull this event together and for publishing the book in the first place. And also, I'd like to give a very special thanks to the Winnipeg Folk Festival for all their help co-presenting and promoting this event. The Folk Festival is, of course, triumphantly returning to the park this year. So please do check out their lineup, which was absolutely fantastic and was just announced. And of course, buy your tickets now, as they're sure to go very, very quickly. We love working with the Folk Fest and are just thrilled that they came on board to help spread the word about this event. I am very keenly aware that I'm the least interesting person who will be speaking here this evening, so I'll try to keep my comments brief. Just to go over the format of the evening, following my welcome, I'll be calling up your host for the evening, Jill Wilson, and Martha to have a chat. Martha will play some songs, and then later on in the evening, they'll also, or a song, and then later on in the evening, there'll be an opportunity for all you out there to ask questions. So you'll notice there is a Q&A box right at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to write your question in that box, and we will put it to Martha as time permits. There is also a live chat. Please feel free to offer any positive words of encouragement or positive comments on the event that you might have in there, and I'll be sure to pass them along to tonight's participants. But that is more than enough from me. I will first introduce your host, and then I'll introduce the subject of this evening. Jill Wilson has been a music reviewer. She has edited the Tab, Detour, and Uptown sections of the Winnipeg Free Press and has previously written for the Arts and Life section as a reporter covering everything from food to films. Currently, she is a copy editor and theater reviewer at the Winnipeg Free Press and the author of the weekly arts newsletter, Applause. Martha Wainwright's memoir, Stories I Might Regret Telling You, is a beautiful and clear-eyed memoir full of music, friendship, love, and heartache, as per Giller Prize winner Shawn Michaels, and has received glowing notices from such luminaries as Jan Arden, Emmylou Harris, and Heather O'Neill. Arden compared the experience of reading the book to sitting in the corner of one of Wainwright's New York apartments, reading her private diaries under a blanket with a flashlight, and it is that immediacy, intimacy, and honesty, not to mention Wainwright's deft humor and insight, that makes this book such a pleasure to spend time with. Martha herself is an internationally renowned singer-songwriter with over 2 decades of industry experience, critically acclaimed for the rawness and emotional honesty of both her vocals and lyrics. Her albums include Martha Wainwright, I Know You're Married, But I've Got Feelings Too, Come Home to Mama, and the Juno-nominated Songs in the Dark, a collaboration with her half-sister Lucy Wainwright Roche, Goodnight City, and her latest album, Love Will Be Reborn, which was released in 2021. She's also an actress and was featured in Martin Scorsese's Aviator and the recent HBO special, Olive Kitteridge. Here to tell us more, please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Jill Wilson and Martha Wainwright.
Nice to virtually meet you.
Hi.
So I wanted to start with the book's been out for a few weeks now. So now that it's been out in the world and people have responded to it, are there stories in it that you regret telling?
No. And I mean, that question has been posed to me a lot, and of course, the title of the book begs the question. No, there's no stories at all that I regret telling. Many of these stories have already been told before in songs and in some books even. I spent a lot of time taking stuff out. I wrote a lot down and had to find my voice. I had never written before, and I guess now I can't say I'm not a writer, but I could say that a couple of weeks ago. And as I said, I put a lot down on the page, knowing that I would take a lot out, and but also knowing that it would I would want to talk about some personal things as well as some taboo subjects. And I knew what the title of the book was going to be for a long time, and the title also played a role in what was put on the page. But no, I don't regret saying it.
I think at the end where you mentioned that you've rewritten it quite a few times, and that at other times an editor took out what you thought was the good stuff. What was your vision for it? What did you want the good stuff to be?
Well, I don't think that the editor, that first editor, I don't know if he took out the good stuff. Obviously the juicy bits were always going to stay, because people like to read that stuff. But it was just that the editor flattened my voice. And I think that one of the things that happened to me when I was asked to write this book, because as I said, I had never written before, was the process of finding that voice, because I had no experience with it, and so I would write, and there would be like this funny stuff, and then this really sad stuff, and then this kind of crazy stuff, and then the straight stuff. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to sort of find a way for this to all make sense, and so in weeding through, it was about what is necessary for me to be there. I don't need to, tell many stories of, crazy nights at Glastonbury, or, nights out on the road and drugs and alcohol, but I'm going to tell a few because I think that that's a part of the story. I don't need to tell every story of me and my brother in our childhood, but I'm going to tell a few because I think that's really important to the story. So it was just about sort of picking the things that made the most sense. There was, and many writers and filmmakers and songwriters that have to do this all the time, where they actually end up having to get rid of some stuff that they really like because then it doesn't work on the whole. So it was a lot of that. And then also, but I think in my case, because there are a few people that are talked about in the book, I sort of go after my dad at the beginning, right from the first page in a way, and I talk about my divorce, and I talk about men in the book that I've been with. I really wanted it to be loving, in the end, and for that to be the primary emotion of it, and not sort of pointing the finger and not targeting anybody, or if there is a target, that we quickly get off of that and move on to something more positive.
Okay. You mentioned that writing songs is not easy for you. You're not fast at it. You're solitary at it. What was the difference for you in writing a book?
Well, it wasn't fast. It took a long time too. I guess with writing songs, a lot of my songs are quite personal, as this book is, but they are cloaked in the safety and beauty of poetry and music and rhythm. And this book has some of that. I like to think that I was able to write well enough because I had some experience writing songs. But songs change, they evolve more. Now, maybe this book will evolve in 10 years or in 20 years when I read it again, it'll have a different meaning. But my songs change nightly, and also they change depending on who's listening to them, because really the songs are not about me or for me, they're really about the listener. Writing the book was much more concrete. And so that was a lot harder. And I would have some nice sentences here and there or some nice paragraphs, but then having, of course, to find a way to make them fit together and to create an arc and to create stories within stories, but then generally a big story. It was very challenging, and it took a lot of work, and I wrestled with it. I didn't pull up my sleeves going, yes, I want to do this. I was like, ugh, I don't. But then I realized every time I would walk away from it for weeks and sometimes months, I went, oh my God, I got to come back to this. And I'm going to have to weigh every word and weigh every sentence and weigh every paragraph and weigh every chapter and then weigh the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And I had never gone through anything like that.
Would you do it again?
I would happily do it again. I think it would be a really different book, and I've thought about it obviously in the last couple of weeks. This story in this book is a story that I've been telling for 25 years and that not only me but journalists and other people have been talking about, because it's a story that sort of haunted me or I've carried with me for so long, and the story of my parents and the story of my brother and the story of me starting off as a musician in my career. So I'm so used to that story. And so in a way, writing this was my intention of it was to sort of tell it for the last time in a way, or to sort of not set the record straight, because it's not very much different than I think what people have written about in the past or thought. So I think to write now would be, I would imagine, even more challenging or different, because I would go, what is this open story, this open slate? Obviously the family that I'm most interested in now is no longer my parents and my brother, but my own children. Mm-hmm. But I don't think kids like to be written about.
I was thinking at the very end.
Yeah.
At the end of the book, you sort of point out that your life is, approximately half over, and I was sort of thinking, it would be interesting for you to do a second volume 30 years later, and sort of see how your opinion of yourself has changed. Because one thing I noticed about this book is you're very, very hard on yourself. Like alarmingly hard on yourself, I think.
That's the other version too.
I wonder if you read it, like, did you feel like it was important to really convey that's how you feel about yourself, or do you look at it now sometimes and say, oh, maybe I was exaggerating? How?
No, I think it's really important. I mean, the first couple of drafts were so self-deprecating, it was crazy. And I didn't read it that way because I was kind of writing in the snarky kind of like, because I was trying different styles, like I didn't, am I going to be like Bridget Jones and say, oh, I've had 10 glasses of wine and I'm fat, or, or whatever, like, because you don't know when you're starting as a writer, you don't know what you should sound like. And it was even more self-deprecating, if that's possible. In a different way. It was more sort of superficially so. The final version still has the deep, the deep sort of, I don't know if it's so much insecurity as it is just, just worry that I'm not, so great, or self-consciousness, concern that I'm, how I'm measuring up, which I think is something that I always clearly was confronted with, how am I measuring up? And I think I'm not alone in that feeling. And also it's quite a woman's story, I find, because it goes through these different kind of guys that were kind of bad, and in a way they weren't terrible, they were just a little bit bad or whatever.
They're just bad for you. They weren't bad.
Yeah, they weren't bad. But so I don't. I realize that it's not a very confident voice, although my music can be quite strident, but it's not a very confident person writing. But I think that that's my story, and I think that we end on a note where there is a shift
Mm-hmm.
to something that's more accepting and kind and with more self-love and things like that.
I think there's a part in there where you talk about going to play a show after the birth of your first son. He's in the hospital, and you're very worried about him, but you go and you play this show, and you come back to the hospital, and you're like, that's what I needed to do. I'm rejuvenated, and now I can be there for him in the way that I should be, because I did what nourishes me, and now I can nourish him. And I think that's a really unique. It's not unique. It's probably many musicians who are also mothers have that feeling, but I think it's something that gets tied up with, as all working mothers do, with like, no, that's frivolous. That part of your life is frivolous. What your job is to look after your child now. You have to give up. And I think your mom probably went through a similar time in her life where that happened. Do you think that's something that a lot of female musicians deal with?
I think that's something that a lot of female musicians deal with, and especially the ones not especially, but in my case, the whole ship is counting on me, though, too. House, you think of a house, the framing and everything that's in it, and where the kids are going to school, or their appointments that they need to get to for their specialists or music lessons or whatever. It's hanging. It's dependent on me, and I have to keep working. But the work takes me away from them, as work takes us away from our children. Thank God. Could you imagine? How difficult that would be. So I really appreciate being able to do both, and knowing that I think that for the first 15 years of my career before I had children, it seemed as though this kind of me-ness of all my songwriting, which is really the case, seemed a little misplaced in a way. I don't think it was misplaced because I think it spoke to a lot of people. It wasn't, but it was just misplaced for me. But I think listeners really appreciated it. But then once I had children, and then could also support them with that me-ness, it made more sense, and it makes more sense. All of this makes more sense talking to you and being on the in a magazine, or doing interviews, or flying around, talking about my music or whatever. It only makes sense to me when I'm on a stage and I'm playing the songs and I'm conveying a message, and then there's a financial transaction maybe at the end, and you go and say, well, this is why this is occurring. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes me want to continue to write songs. But although I never write them to make money, but I think I have to keep going.
Mm-hmm. There's a song on your new album, I think, that speaks to that a bit. Not necessarily the financial transaction part, but the middle of the lake, where you're talking about like rock and roll, essentially. I assume you're singing to rock and roll. It's like that is saving your life. Yeah. And you I mean, that's conveyed in the book as well. That sort of I have to sing, but this singing is what keeps me alive, in both in a literal sense and in a metaphorical sense.
Absolutely. And that song was the last song that I wrote before the record came out. It was just, I just wrote it a few months before the record came out. And so it was like it's the main an actual pandemic song, because I wrote it during the summer of 2020, you know, when I was like, am I ever gonna, maybe we're gonna get the heck out of this lake and the Laurentians and actually go do a show again, and the importance of that, of working and music.
There's a really nice passage in here. I'm just going to try and find it here if I can grab my book, where you talk about, I mean, you've already talked a bit about finding your voice, like as a writer, but you talk here about like your physical voice. One person's voice is handed to them like a gift. Another person has to create a voice literally in her gut, her heart, her throat. Some people seem to channel someone else's voice, taking it on and welcoming it. Your body is your own, but sometimes it's also a tool for someone else to come through. Sometimes singing feels like a skill, and sometimes it feels like an art. Singing has saved my life. I wonder if you could just talk about that sentiment a little bit.
Well, I think that, you know, I was so lost for a long time, and I continue to feel a little bit lost. And that's the beginning of the book, sort of starts with that idea of being lost or just sort of flailing in a way, and just and I think it's a feeling that a lot of us have, you know, of uncertainty of, you know, why am I here, or what am I doing? Am I in the right place? Is this who am I? What's going on? And but singing and being able to sing, even though it was never easy for me to sing, in the sense that I struggled with, you know, to find the notes and to sing perfectly, or to sing the way people wanted me to sing. People early on in my career wanted me to be a little bit different, and I knew that if I worked with them, I might be more famous, but I resisted them. I made a lot of bad decisions in my work life, because I was really wanted to just follow my heart in many ways, and my gut, my instinct, which was a bit squirrely, let's say. But so many times, you know, when I've been so sad, or walking home at the end of a late night when I was younger, feeling rejected, dejected, or feeling so insecure about whatever, some guy or whatever, you know, when I would sing to myself, it made it better, you know. And even recently, in the recent past, you know, I was having a really hard time after I got divorced, and I was really scared and really freaked out, and there was like lawyers and money. It was just like really scary. I had never had anything like that happen to me. And I think that I was maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was like connecting to something that had happened to me when I was a kid. I don't know why I was so affected by it. But a couple of times I was like one time in particular, I remember I was in the bathtub, and I started singing like the blues, you know, but it was like real. It was really weird, you know, like my whole life I had, you know, sort of caricatured, you know, these sounds of the blues, you know, like we all do as singers, especially white singers who know nothing about this kind of music, where it comes from in the South or whatever. We kind of like, the blues, whatever, we're kind of, but then all of a sudden I was like literally wailing, and the melody was like, and I was like, oh my God, it's happened. Oh my God. And I got really kind of excited. It's like, it's gotten so bad that I can actually sing the blues. It's kind of amazing. And I felt really great for a minute.
Yeah. Paradoxically, really. That's
Exactly.
I think your voice is unique in a lot of ways, but partially I think it has this ability to slide into rawness. That's, it's very beautiful, and then it can be almost ugly just in like the emotion that it conveys. And when you're talking about singing the blues, like I don't think Celine Dion could sing the blues. She has this instrument that she's, the lemon water and the warm honey tea that makes it incapable probably of conveying that kind of.
But now she's totally, in the young generation, she's totally turned into a hipster. But yes, I hear what you're saying.
Just from a pure vocal standpoint, I think like it's a different instrument, right? Yeah. And is there anything you do for your voice that to keep it in shape, or do you just let it be?
No, I struggled with, I would lose my voice a lot. I think I talked about that a little bit in the book, and because I used to smoke a lot, or I used to smoke. I wasn't a lot, but I smoke and stay out late and drink. And then, when I was around my family, I would lose my voice a lot. So it's definitely something dramatic or whatever. And then about 10 years ago, I started doing vocal exercises a little bit before each show, and obviously, and then I quit smoking, and did like a basic. I remember the first when I realized it was time for me to do that was when I was on the road with Sean Lennon, who's not like a great singer, but and he was like probably on acid. It was something like his father's acid, or we were on acid. We were like in Holland somewhere, and he's so great, but he was pretty rock and roll, and then before his show, he was doing vocal exercising. I was like, well, if Sean Lennon's going to do it, I guess I better do it. So I got, someone showed me a few little things, and I do them.
When you're talking about finding your singing voice and finding your writing voice, did writing this book change the way that you write songs? Change the voice that you write in?
Well, I have to say it wasn't. Well, I think it did. Sorry. So I've only written one song since the book has been out, which is I started writing a song a couple weeks ago. Was the first time that I've written a song in a while, because I've been so busy, and the song ended up being about the book. So I don't know what that means. I would say that this last record that I made, called Love Will Be Reborn, I think lyrically is my best record, or one of my best, or, I know people always love the first albums, and of course, because there's so much that goes into a first record. There's a whole, 20 years of life and angst and youth, and, so I understand that. But I would definitely say that Love Will Be Reborn has a lot of strong, moments lyrically, and that was, since writing this book and working on this book and going through that exercise. So I would like to think so.
When you wrote some very revealing things, and here's some very emotional things that you had to revisit. So talking about the death of your mother, obviously, even 12 years later, still very upsetting, life-changing for you. And when the birth of your son, who was quite ill, again, something that, is life-altering. You never recover from that, I think. What did it feel like to revisit that, to write about it? Was it cathartic, or was it traumatic?
It was cathartic. It was really good. I think finally, after many years, writing it down and telling the story on paper that I had told so many times to myself in my own mind, or to my friends, was good to do, to sort of try and find a way to tell the story, because it's quite complicated. I go here for a couple of days and come out, and I'm trying to convey the difficult and confusing aspect of it, so making decisions about what aspects of the story to tell. I think that was a really great exercise, and really helped me to sort of close the book on it in a way. And that being said, when I wrote it and continued to come back into it and edit it and stuff like that, I would still cry, and I would think, well, as long as I'm still crying, it's good. And when I did the audio book in December, whatever it was, I cried in the vocal booth. So I thought, well, that's good, because I think it should continue to make me cry, hopefully for a long, long time.
Are you someone who does keep a diary? Like, did you have records of no?
It's terrible.
So what was the process like for you of casting yourself back?
I mean,
did you go through photographs? Did you talk to people?
Just to say, like, my like diary or like my like writing is so funny. Like, if there's like these like books around where it would be like a little, like a couple of sentences, like when I was younger, some lyrics, and then it would be like, you know, a list of people to call, pay hydro, pay the bill, pay the tickets, pay the tickets, pay the tickets, pay the tickets, you know. And that's all it is. It's like, pay the tickets, and then like maybe like a list of people that I want to come to my show or whatever, you know. Like, really, there was not anything there, you know, that I could go back to. I called people. I interviewed. You know, I just started writing. Would write for like a few days, and then was like really tired and not write for like weeks, and because I had other stuff to do. And then I would be like, okay, now I got to get back to this. And then I would call, like I called Rufus a couple of times. It kind of interviewed him. I went down to speak to him about, you know, what do you remember from this time? I took some notes, you know, because people remember things differently, you know.
Yeah.
Siblings remember things really differently. I didn't adjust my writing to hit what he said. I just was like making sure that I wasn't like crazy, you know. I called some key kind of people. My Aunt Anna, I asked questions to, but they were usually kind of fact checking. You know, what year was that, or who was that person again, or, you know, so sort of going back to make sure that I wasn't getting it completely wrong. Yeah.
Were there any instances where you were completely wrong? Were you surprised by how someone else's recollections of something were so completely contrary to what how you recalled it?
No, there was one story that I told that my aunt didn't really remember, but I remember it, so I kept it in there, and then I told her, you know. And no, there was no. I was pleased oftentimes to hear things. The story of my parents. There's a story that I tell that I tell in such a way in the book where it's clear that the story has different versions of my parents sort of the story which is behind the subject of a couple of my mom's really great songs, which is, you know, where my mother had their first child was born early, and he had gone to London, and she didn't come back. He didn't come back with her, and he had gone with somebody else. And, you know, so I called a couple of people that were there at that time, and they all had sort of a similar kind of idea. I remembered it from the way that my mother recounted it, so I was going to tell that story, you know, and how I imagined it in my mind, you know, whether it is exactly what happened, I don't think anybody knows, you know. And but it's pretty close, you know. It's pretty it's about right.
Did you run any of what you'd written by people before it was published? Were you concerned about reaction like that?
No, I mean, obviously when you write something like this and you mention people by name, and then there's like a legal activity, you have to call them, and, you know, our legal team goes through it. And especially in England, where they're much stricter, the rules are much tighter there. In the States, although people sue more often, they seem to have more sort of I guess, freedom of speech, or I don't know what, sort of allowed more, whereas in England they seemed a little bit more concerned. So I just would call people like, who were mentioned by name, who were famous, who were in scenes where I was taking drugs and they were taking drugs, and let them know. None of them had a problem with that. Most of these people are sober now, so they're not happy, but they generally talk about excess in a way, and as being something that was in their past.
Yeah, I think while the early part of the book seems like it's a lot of fun, right? You're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. It's like very little responsibility, just having a good time. But it does come off as wearying, I think, by the end. Like it feels like you were tired of it a little bit as well.
Well, that's what happens.
Yeah.
It's like a big giant hangover. And they're real, and I want to go back and just, to have to make those calls was not easy. And to be on phone conversations with 3 or 4 or 5 lawyers for 2 hours time, when they would go through it line by line, it was not easy, because there were things that I took out that I didn't want to, but I knew I had to.
Mm-hmm.
There were things that I had to say goodbye to. There were things that I was like, no, screw that. I'm going to keep that in, fuck them, like whatever, like I don't care, but it was like really emotionally exhausting, because you got the sense that, shit can happen. And I think that where I had to really make decisions was obviously about my dad, because I wanted to talk about my dad, but I didn't want to do it in a way that he was really like totally hurt by. I mean, that being said, the story is very hurtful, so it's hard to do that. Mm-hmm. But he's a really smart person who understands the importance of expression, and he allowed for me to say what I wanted to say. And then the place that was the hardest to have to I wrote a lot of stuff down when I was divorced about, my ex-husband, Brad Albetta, who was such a huge part of my life and a huge part of my music career. And that was really hard to square. And I put stuff down, and then I took a lot of it out because it made no sense to put it in, or because it didn't read well, or because it was dark, because the children would hate it, because it was stupid. So and then that felt good to sort of let it go, but I had to let it go. I shed some tears about that.
Killing your darlings, they call that, right? But I mean, it's like we were talking about, writing this book at a different time. It's very much colored by where you were in your life at that time, I think. And I think, it probably would be a different book if you wrote it today, or if you wrote it in a year, or if you'd written it 5 years earlier, right? It's very interesting how I think perspectives shift depending on how you feel about yourself or what your circumstances are at that time.
But hopefully it still rings true in 10 years. I mean, that was it,
Yeah. Okay, I think we're probably gonna break for you. Do you want to read a passage and play a song, or vice versa?
I could read a passage. I don't know if there was anything that's in particular that you wanted to talk about or me to read about from the stuff that we mentioned.
I mean, something about your mom would be nice, probably. I love the part where she rode her bike to New York from Montreal. It's less sentimental, but it's kind of I think it's a nice. Hold on, I think I've got it marked here.
Yeah, tell me which page that is.
I think it's 64.
Wow, maybe
I have the advanced copy. I hope the pages are the same.
I think they are, yeah. Okay. I have the advanced copy too. I don't like to see the pictures.
Oh, there's pictures in it?
Oh, you haven't seen the pictures?
No.
You're the advanced copy. It's okay. All right. Not that I'd actually trade the parents I had. Once in the summer, just after I'd moved to New York, Kate decided to cycle all the way from Montreal to New York. Sorry, Kate decided to cycle all the way from Montreal to see me. On a hot day, she got aboard her 10-speed and pushed off. She didn't tell anyone or make any plans or preparations. Just to stop for a minute. So she would have been probably, if I was 22, she's 30 years older than me, so 52. She didn't tell anyone or make any plans or preparations, and she didn't bring anything with her, aside from an old army surplus backpack with metal clips that dug into her shoulders. She wore clogs and cut-off jeans, no phone. Jack Kerouac was one of her heroes, and she'd always yearned for the road and potentially dangerous adventure. She was very interested in Kerouac's Quebec roots and the relationship he had with his French-Canadian mother. At 47, the age at which Kerouac had died, she embraced his spirit and wrote a musical based on his life. That was in parentheses. My mother, in midlife, free of her children and the demands of domesticity, blossomed even more as an artist and individual. I was always impressed by that, although at the time, I admit I found it annoying too. Stunts like these, my mother's need for attention always got in the way of my own need for attention. Even in her late 40s and 50s, when she walked into a room, she outshone me and everyone there. After about 100 miles on her bike, Kate knew she wasn't going to be able to pedal all the way to Nick Hill's door. Nick Hill was my manager in New York City at the time, which is where I was living at the time. So she checked into a B&B for a night's sleep, and the next day managed to make it to Ticonderoga, New York, where she and her bike caught a train to Penn Station. When I picked her up, I could have killed her, and might have if she weren't so exhausted, the backs of her legs sunburned and her hands covered with blisters. It turns out those silly bike gloves exist for a reason. I remember her pedaling down the sidewalk toward me as I waited at the wheels of Nick's car on 8th Avenue. And as she got close, she flung one leg over to meet the other and coasted, looking as proud and rebellious as a teenager. We couldn't fit the bike in Nick's little car, so she drove the car back to Brooklyn while I followed behind her on the bike. It was a hot summer night. When we got home, Nick poured her a whiskey and even let her smoke in the house, something he never allowed with anyone else.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, do you want to play a tune and then we'll go to the Q&A?
Sure. So we talked a little bit about, let's see here. We talked a little bit about this new record, Love Will Be Reborn, so I'll sing that song, which is a hopeful song, and I think how the book kind of ends, because the book has a lot of, dark little passages and a big dark stories in the middle, but I think ends on a up note. I cried only one tear for us today. I will wipe it away before the day begins. And there's love in every part of me, I know. The kiss falling deep into the snow. But when the spring comes, I will find it, and I lock my heart to unwind it, and love will be born. And love will be born.
I'll clap for everyone else that you can't hear clapping, I'm sure. That was beautiful. Thank you. We have some clapping in the Q&A here. All right, let's get to the questions here from some of our viewers. Jill would like to know, which of your and your mother's traits would you like your sons to inherit?
Oh, good question. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Well, I mean, my mother was so musically gifted, and I think I am as well. And I think it's gave us a lot of joy. I'm only saying this because I feel like I can. My eldest son has ADHD, as did my mother. They used to call it St. Vitus dance. But I know that music and playing an instrument and being able to sing and being able to create really focused her in. And so that kind of frenetic energy being able to put into music, into playing an instrument, I think really gave her a lot and changed her life for the best. And I think that also for me, I think that one trait that I've learned over time was to be accepting of people. So I'd like my boys to be like that.
Nice. Kind of a connected question. How would you feel about your children following in your footsteps someday? Would you talk to them about a musician's life differently than your parents talked to you about it?
I don't think so. I don't know if my parents really talked to me about a musician's life. They talked to me about their lives, and but I witnessed the musician's life, just by seeing what they had to go through. I mean, what they had to go through, what they went through. And I think that my kids are seeing that. One of the things that I've tried to make the boys understand, and especially in the last little while, in the last 6 months since this record has come out, this last record, and they're older, is for them to understand that when I leave for 4 or 5 days, that they understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and then I come back, and then and then when I can bring them, they see, okay, there's a sound check, and then I have dinner, and then I have a show, and then I go back to the hotel. Just so that they understand what it is. And that they know what it is.
How old are they now?
8 and 12.
Okay.
8 and 12, yeah.
So would you want them to be performers though?
Well, only if they wanted to. I would say it's already started. My eldest definitely wants to be a performer, but he also wants to avoid doing homework at all costs and doing math. So being a performer is a way to do that. And I know that instinct as well. It is a fun life, and obviously has a lot of, he has a band already, and the bands really matter to him. And it's so funny because his band, I'm at my little music venue right now. There's no one here, don't worry. And just us. And he rehearses here, and there's 4 kids in the band. He's 12, the other 3 are 13. And they had their first band fight. It was like tears and people swearing at each other. I was like, you see, that's the problem with the band. Write your own songs.
Another question is from Constance. How do you know when to take on a brand new project that is unlike what you've done before, especially at this juncture of your life?
Well, I've taken on a lot of new projects recently. You know, I mean, obviously writing a book was really hard to do, and that was a new project, and it was really took a while, and the road was not a straight road. But being in this music venue, I opened up this space with my new partner like 3 years ago, and we had a year before COVID or whatever. So that's been, and we've been open on and off ever since. We're opening up again. That's been really kind of amazing, and I'm happy for it, although it's kind of crazy to do it. But and I've always sort of dipped into other things, whether it's a little bit of acting or I ran a summer camp this summer at last summer, sorry, at Ursa, or getting involved in some local politics a little bit. You know, I seem to like to do that, you know, and jump in, but I always jump in as me, you know. I just show up as me and as the artist that people know me as, and that's what I can bring to the project. I don't pretend to be able to bring any like organizational skills, any computer skills. I can cook and clean and bark orders.
Richard says, your book is so self-revealing, even with the bits that you pulled out. I see you as a blessed survivor, and I wonder, do you think of yourself that way?
I don't know if I think of myself as a survivor, although I felt definitely a little bit like a victim, which I did not like that feeling. And so in that way, maybe I am a survivor, you know, and that I've had to find ways to keep going and to have a good attitude, especially for the kids, you know, so that they don't see me fall apart and they don't see me crumple, and I've had to sort of push through a lot of things. And so maybe I do feel a little bit like a survivor.
All right. We have probably time for one more question. Darlene says, do you and your brother see one another often, and do you collaborate?
We don't see each other that often because he lives in Los Angeles, and obviously with COVID, it's been even more complicated, you know. So I'll be with him on Easter weekend, and we were together at Christmas, and we see each other during the summer months sometimes. But when we do see each other, it's generally when we're collaborating. So if we'll do a big Christmas concert, McGarrigle, Wainwright Christmas show, or a Kate McGarrigle tribute, or we recently, in the last 2 years, we've done these shows called Mother, which are just the two of us on stage with a piano player. They mostly happen in Europe. So that is where we do oftentimes spend the most amount of time together. And we have, you know, it's a nice way to spend there's work involved, so there's singing, and then we rehearse, we sing together, and then we get to have dinner, and then we get up in the morning and we go have coffee, and then we have rehearsal, and you know, it's just you get to spend days and days together, but it's in the context of work, so it makes a lot of sense.
Thanks. All right, I think that's probably all the time we have for. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate talking to you. I hope you're going to be touring soon.
Yes, I will be. Yeah.
In Canada, I hope.
There's some stuff in Canada. Yeah.
Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you wanted to?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Good.
Great. I don't know if John wanted to pop in and tell people where they can buy the book. And
oh, absolutely. If they're If you have any interest in this book, which you absolutely should because it is a brilliant read, we have many copies, including signed copies as well, which Martha very kindly signed, available at the store. So give us a call, visit us in person, order a copy of the book on our website, and we'll be sure to find a way to get a copy to you. We're so very grateful to Penguin Random House, the Winnipeg Folk Festival, and our compatriots in Saskatoon for helping to spread the word around the event. Also, so very grateful to you, Jill, for taking the time out to host this event and coming on board and doing so with such aplomb. And thank you to all of you out there joining us virtually, both here in Zoom and on YouTube. Thank you very much for spending the evening with us. And please join me in giving a very warm, virtual, and somewhat silent round of applause to Martha Wainwright. Thank you so much, Martha.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thank you.